Ahoy there, Captain Benzie here, coming at you with another episode of the Frigate Pilot's Manifesto, the series that aims to teach you everything you need to know about the different frigates of Eve Echoes. In today's video, we're going to be taking our first look at a Tech 9 Stealth Bomber 2 with the Minmatar Hound II. Of course it was going to be the Hound II, you guys know how much I love the Hound, so the Hound II seems the first one to have a look at. Now, I know a lot of you folks have been asking for videos on things like the Manticore, the Purifier, and the Nemesis Tier 6 Stealth Bomber, and I just want to say I might get around to that eventually, but as it stands, I just really don't rate those ships. If you're into piloting a stealth bomber, I just feel like the Hound does everything you'd want a stealth bomber to do really well, and in most cases does it flat out better than the other three, which is kind of a shame, and I'd like to see some changes to the other stealth bombers, just so the Hound isn't this obvious best choice. But anyway, of course that means that today we're going to be looking at the Hound II, and we're going to have a look at the Hound and the Hound II in comparison. Is the Hound II just a straight up upgrade? It's 3 tech levels higher than the Hound. Tech level 6 for the Hound, tech level 9 for the Hound II. Does that mean it's a straight up upgrade, or is it a more situational ship? And if it's more situational, what kind of situation should you be using either of these in? Now, for the purposes of this video as well, I will be showcasing some of this on the live server, and I will be showcasing some on the Fulmination test server. Now, the Fulmination test server, of course, is the place where I have 555 in every single skill, and I will be talking briefly about how that actually affects the Hound. Is there a big difference between having the skills, all the way up to 555, or is it better just to keep them at a sort of a standard level? And that's what we're going to have a look at briefly. And I'm doing bits on the live server and bits on the test server because currently there is a bounty on my head, and despite what Reddit may tell you, I'm not bitter about this. I actually find it freaking hilarious. For starters, I find it absolutely hilarious that GenFed sat there and gave this massive long outrage that, oh, we wouldn't put a bounty on someone like you, you're not that important, rah rah rah, and then a few weeks later out comes a bounty for 500 million. That is 50 times larger than the other bounties I've seen in the GenFed bounty channel, so thanks guys, I'm genuinely really flattered by that, and I do find it hilarious. I'm not trying to mock GenFed here. I love GenFed. There's a great bunch of guys there. Unfortunately, there are some really rotten apples in there as well, but that's the case with almost every alliance out there. Obviously, except Void. Come join us. We're awesome. Now, ultimately, yes, GenFed, you've made me giggle here. I'm not butthurt about it. I do find it absolutely hilarious and genuinely flattering. The trouble is that, yes, of course, that does interfere with me doing content because I don't want to undock a solo PvP ship into a fleet of cruisers. It's just not going to go well for me. Now, it does give me the opportunity to perhaps undock with something that could go up against a fleet and get some really cool content, so I will be trying that later today and seeing if anyone can find me. Do also stay tuned as well toward the end of this video, as I will be announcing our 2 Combo Omega giveaways, giveaway winners from last week when we were looking at the different battleships. Anyway, if you do enjoy this video, let me know by hitting a like on it, sub to the channel for all things Eve Echoes, ding the notification bell to never miss an upload, let me know in the comment section down below what ships, what topics you want to see in future, and if you do want to go the extra mile to support this channel, you can do so by joining us on Patreon, or by heading over to the Redbubble merchandise store. Lots of really cool merch there. I've seen quite a few of you folks picking up little bits and pieces. It's really flattering. I love the concept that you're going to be walking around somewhere in a Catskill Academy t-shirt. That's really, really cool. Anyway, folks, let's jump right in to talking about the Hound II. The first wave of stealth bombers were Tech 6 frigates in their individual ship tree. So obviously the Caldari State Tech 6 stealth bomber was the Manticore, the Glente Federation had the Nemesis, and the Amar Empire had the Purifier. If we're going into the Minmatar Republic ship tree, of course at tech level 6, the frigate branch here, we had the Hound. This means, of course, up at tech level 9, the second version of these are available. In this case, obviously, the Hound II, and the one we're going to be looking at in this video. Now, the Hound itself is actually a modified breacher hull. Basically, the Minmatar Republic took the breacher hull design and then modified it upwards to fit larger, more powerful missile systems. In this case, obviously, the medium torpedoes for the Hound at tech level 6, and its large torpedoes here at tech level 9, but we'll come to that more later on. Now, I really quite like the Hound's visual design. I do like the fact that it's got this muted sort of copper colour to it, this burnished bronze almost. Very cool looking ship. The only disappointing thing to say about the Hound II's appearance is that if, like me, you've bought one of the fire skins for the stealth bombers, these do not carry across to their Tier 2 versions. That's kind of disappointing. It means you are stuck with this skin currently. There are no alternative skins here for the Hound 2, and I do hope that NetEase fix that eventually by adding those fire skins to the Tier 2 versions of the stealth bombers. Anyway, enough about how it looks. Let's have a look at its stats and compare these to the Hound. Now first, you should notice that the fitting profile has changed somewhat. Whereas the Tech 6 stealth bombers had 3 high slots, 2 mid slots, 3 low slots, and then 2 of each of the rigs. Here on the Tech 9 versions, we've got 3 high slots again, but we go up to 3 mid slots, and we have a 3rd combat rig and a 3rd engineering rig. Same number of highs and lows, but we're getting additional mid slots and rigs, which is pretty cool. It allows a little bit more versatility and a bit more firepower thanks to those rig slots. Now, if we look at the power grid output here, the Hound 2 has a power grid of 61 megawatts. That is a 17% increase on the Hound's power grid of 52. This is then combined with a larger capacitor, 576 gigajoules here on the Hound 2, compared to the Hound's 483 gigajoules. Again, that is a 19% increase, which just gives you that little bit more stability and fitting of some of the larger modules. It can cope with that kind of thing a little bit better, which kind of makes sense. The larger power grid, of course, is because the Hound 2 is going to be using large torpedoes rather than medium torpedoes, so that's one of our biggest differences already. Anyway, we'll talk more about that later on. The cargo hold is the same, it's 510 cubic meters. Defense has increased for the Hound 2 from 2223 to 2953. That is a whopping 33% increase. That is a big jump. Obviously, it's still a frigate, it's still very fragile, even by frigate standards. Certainly at Tech Level 9, this is more fragile than some of the Tech Level 3, Tech Level 4 destroyers. Very, very fragile, but it's going to struggle to get hit. Why do I say that? Because the signature radius here is a diminutive 22 meters. That's down from 25.4, a 14% reduction. And in addition to that, the flight velocity has increased from 366 meters per second up to 386 meters per second. That's a 5% increase in flight velocity base and a 14% decrease in the signature radius. That means you've got a much better speed tank. And if you've watched my video on the Hound, you'll know that the Hound itself was already a terrifyingly good speed tank. So the Hound 2 does that even better, which is absolutely hilarious, and I love it so much for this. If we're looking at the bottom, then we do have the same warp speed of 5.0 astronomical units per second, and the mass and inertia modifier are both the same as well at 1.455 million kilograms and an inertia modifier of 2.3 times. So basically, in a nutshell, what you're looking at is a slightly improved fitting profile, you are a smaller and faster moving ship, and it's got slightly higher defences as well. That in itself makes the Hound 2 look immediately like it's going to be a direct upgrade. And spoiler alert for the rest of the video, if you're running the Hound and you're using it for PvE, so going up like ratting and things, and you're using the standard missile torpedo build that I showcased in that particular video, I will try and put a link on screen and in the description now if I remember. I know I'm terrible for that, sorry folks. But if you're running the PvE build that doesn't use the medium or the large torpedoes, then the Hound 2 absolutely is a flat-on direct upgrade. The difference between it being an upgrade and a side grade, however, comes thanks to the trait description. Now, whereas the Hound, the Tech 6 Hound, is built around medium torpedoes, here the Hound 2 is built around large torpedoes. If we look at the roll bonus, first and foremost we have a 99% reduction to the amount of power grid that large torpedoes require. That in itself means suddenly those are able to fit on a frigate. You are using battleship-sized torpedoes on a frigate, and that is both amazing but not without its own drawbacks. Obviously, torpedoes, large torpedoes, have a massive explosion radius and a very slow explosion velocity. And if you've watched my video on how missiles work, you'll understand that that means they are very bad at applying their damage to smaller, faster moving targets like frigates and destroyers. If you're using large torpedoes, you are going to struggle against those smaller, faster moving ships. You'll get big numbers on the DPS screen, but you can't actually apply that to your target, and I'll showcase that later in the combat section. However, if you're going up against things like battleships, battle cruisers, any of those large ships out there, then suddenly you're able to do a frightening amount of damage with those torpedoes. It's just about knowing your targets and what you're going up against. Now, being a stealth bomber as well, not only do we have a 50% reduction to the delay in reactivating a cloaking device. Normally it's about 30 seconds, here it's 15 seconds before you can reactivate a cloaking device that's dropped. You also get the ability to fit covert ops cloaking devices, which are the ones that you can use whilst warping, so you can warp into a battlefield whilst cloaked, so the other person doesn't even know you're there. You then move into a prime position, drop the cloak, lock on, and smack them in the face with some large torpedoes. However, this does also come with a 100% decrease to the lock delay in a cloaking device. Normally, if you've got a cloaking device on and you drop your cloak, it's about 30 seconds before you can lock onto a target, at which point they've probably spotted you and walked away, unless they warped away, sorry. Although, yeah, with 30 seconds delay, they probably could walk away. It's 30 seconds before you can even start locking onto the target. With a stealth bomber here, you can drop that cloak and start locking immediately. Now, of course, covert ops cloaks do have a decrease to your scan resolution, which means they do slow down how quickly you lock on, but again, more on that later. If we're looking across at the skill bonuses here, like the Hound before it, we get Expert Frigate Command, giving a 5% increase to flight velocity. So if, like me, you have Expert Frigate Command 5, that is 25% additional flight velocity. I discussed this in the Hound video. That just makes us even better at speed tanking. That speed I talked about already of 386 meters per second is cold. That is what the ship has naturally. You're adding another 25% on for flight velocity, plus anything that the Frigate Command skill gives you anyway, because of course Frigate Command increases your frigate's flight velocity, and then you're probably going to put like an afterburner on there as well to make this thing absolutely monstrous in its speed. Now, whereas the Hound had then a medium missile torpedo upgrade, the Hound II of course has large missile torpedo upgrade. This means it's actually surprisingly useful if you're the kind of person who's going to be flying something like, I don't know, a Raven, and thus training into large missile torpedo skills, then you may decide that actually the Hound makes a nice little side grade, or any of the stealth bombers arguably, make a nice little side grade. Something a little bit smaller and faster that's using that same weapon system and those same skills. And here you can see it gives a 10% increase to the explosive damage of the large torpedoes, and a 5% increase to the electromagnetic damage, and this differs between the Hound, the Purifier, the Manticore, and the Nemesis. The actual damage types change. Ultimately, that means obviously our torpedoes are going to be doing more damage. Here with the Hound II, I really like the Hound for this, because you're getting 50% additional explosive damage, which is excellent against armor tanking, any sort of, like, you know, armor that you get to, but then you're also getting 25% increase to the electromagnetic damage, which helps you cut through shields quite quickly too. You're kind of burning the candle at both ends, which is really, really cool here on a ship. Finally then, it's a 10% increase to the large torpedo flight velocity, 50% additional range on those large torpedoes. Again, that's before we account for any skills. That's a really powerful ability. Anyway, let's have a look at how you can fit this, taking those large torpedoes into account. This is the fit that I'm personally using on my own Hound II, and of course it's leaning heavily into those large torpedo launcher skills, because if you hand me a frigate and tell me it can fit large torpedoes, you can bet your ass that I'm going to fit them. It's a frigate with battleship-sized weaponry. What's not to love here? Of course I'm going to fit the large torpedoes. Anyway, I've gone for Pith C-types. Pith C-types large torpedoes at this point in time, as of the time of me making this video, are fairly cheap on the market. I think I paid about 11 million ISK for each of them, 11-12 million ISK, somewhere around there. I am aware of the so-called Benzie effect, however, where when I put up a video, both the ship and any fittings used tend to increase on the market, which, quite frankly, is just a good reason for you to subscribe to the channel and make sure that you've dinged that notification bell. If you spot a ship that you like, you can get on the market and you can buy it and the fittings whilst they're still relatively cheap. And if you're a marketeer, you can see what videos I'm making, and then you can put those ships and those modules on the market at an increased price, knowing that they're probably going to sell for those prices. Anyway, enough of that. As I said, I've gone for Pith C-type large torpedo launchers. If the price does rocket up at the end of this video, doesn't really matter. If you can only go for storyline, or heck, even if you can only fit like Republic Fleet or Caldari Navy large torpedo launchers, those still do good damage. Here on the Pith C-types, however, we're looking at a DPS of 158. Now, the DPS only tells half the story. That's based on the fact that these things launch once every about 14 seconds. The actual alpha strike that each of those waves does, however, is formidable. 458 thermal damage, 458 kinetic damage, 572 electromagnetic, and 687 explosive damage. That's monstrous, and those two, the electromagnetic and the explosive, are of course being increased by the Hound II's skills. The other part of that skill on the Hound II is the missile range increases up to 21.38 kilometers in this case. That's a pretty nice range to be firing torpedoes at. That's further than most battleships are going to be able to fire them, at least. Now, the trouble with large torpedoes, of course, well, the double trouble with large torpedoes is their explosion velocity and their explosion radius. They may have absolutely monstrous damage there, and we're looking at a very high DPS on paper here of 473.29. However, that's only half the story. We do have a very large explosion radius at 244 meters and a very slow explosion velocity of 79.88 meters per second, and that's how I've boosted it to this point. It's worse than this when you're just fitting cold. This, of course, if you're familiar with how missiles and torpedoes work, and if you're not, you really should go watch my video on how missiles and torpedoes work. I will try and put a link in the description down below, possibly one on screen now as well if I remember. Ultimately, big explosion radius and slow explosion velocity means that it's going to struggle to apply damage to anything that's fast or small. Now, against a battleship or a battlecruiser, this is going to do a rather hefty amount of damage per launch, but against frigates and destroyers and some cruisers, you might actually struggle to apply even half of the damage. It's that kind of trade-off here, and I will showcase that later on in the combat section when I'm flying this particular version of the Hound. Now, ultimately, as I said, this just means that if you're targeting against large ships, like battle cruisers, battleships, retrievers, then these large torpedo launchers are capable of doing a truly terrifying amount of damage. But if you're going to be going up against the smaller targets, you're probably going to want to swap these high slots for things just like standard torpedo launchers and go from there. Again, if you haven't watched my original video on the Hound, I recommend doing so because I talk about that in there, showcasing how it works using those smaller fittings. Basically, replicate the Hound fitting, but using but then obviously add an extra mid slot and the extra rigs. Now, as we look at things then, of course, if we're going to have those problems with our large torpedoes, we can use our mid-slots to try and correct this. If we've got a large explosion radius, which means it struggles to hit smaller targets, then why not use a target painter? Make the target bigger. That means that missile can apply its damage better. Awesome, right? And if they've got a slow explosion velocity and thus they're going to struggle to hit fast-moving ships, why not slow them the hell down with a stasis Weber fire? So if we make them a bigger, slower target, then our missiles are going to be able to apply their damage better. And of course, a warp scrambler. I've gone for a warp scrambler here rather than a warp disruptor, simply because this switches off micro warp drives, thus dropping their flight velocity even further, and it will lock them in place in PvP. So it's got PvE use in that it'll switch off a micro warp drive, it's got PvP use in that it will hold an enemy in place, and switch off their micro warp drive if they happen to have one. For the low slots then, I've gone for a small afterburner. Now if we have a brief look at the navigation section here on the fitting page, you'll see that the cold speed here of the Hound II is 747.88 meters per second. That's horrifically fast. That's of course based on the fact that I personally have expert frigate command up to 5. That means I'm getting all the bonuses from frigate command, of course giving additional flight velocity to the frigate itself, plus the Hound II gets that additional 5% flight velocity when I find it there, additional 5% flight velocity per level of expert frigate command. So you're getting 25% from expert frigate command at 5, then we're getting all the other bonuses just from the frigate command skill itself added into that. Then we're going to add on the afterburner to give an additional 193% flight velocity when activated, and unlike a micro warp drive, obviously this doesn't eat the top of our capacitor, doesn't take off that top 25% capacitor, nor does it make our signature radius bigger. We're blessed with a very small signature radius of 22 meters, let's try and keep it that way, and you'll find that speed tanking with this is more than viable. On the other side of things, I've gone for a weapon upgrade module here, an Iron Blood damage control system, but you could go for, like, again, the Gisty C-type version, which I think is the ballistic control system, that kind of thing. Any of the missile damage upgrades very useful here weapon upgrade. We're getting 5% damage increase and 4.3% reduction to activation time just for having this fitted. You can then activate it for an even bigger boost for the duration here of 44 seconds, thanks to me being on fulmination currently with full skills there, or however long it is for you personally if you haven't trained into all those missile skills. When you're activating the weapon upgrade system, you get that activation time with a bigger boost to damage, and then it's just got a 60-second reactivation delay. Now then, if we were to look my third and final low slot here, I've gone for a Disaster Medium Shield Booster. This is based around PvE, this exact fitting here, so by using a medium shield booster, which you should be able to fit, you might need some points in frigate engineering. Go for a small if you absolutely have to. The idea here is just that if I take any incidental damage whilst approaching something, I can quickly repair it up with 1 or 2 cycles. It does look a little bit misleading that I've got 27 seconds of capacitor. That's of course because I've got that oversized shield booster. You're only going to run it for 1 or 2 cycles at a time at most, and then you're going to leave it off for ages and it'll recharge. When you get down to about 70% shield, you activate it for a cycle and bam, you're back up to 100%, so on and so forth. You should be avoiding damage more often than not. Now in PvP, you'd swap this for a Mark 9 Covert Ops Cloaking Device, or Mark 7, but if you're up at Mark 9 and flying this, why not go for the best in the business? Now what this does, of course, it's a cloaking device, which means you don't appear on grid, you move completely cloaked, as long as there's nothing within 2,000 meters, 2 kilometers. Anything gets within that 2 kilometer window, your cloaking device will drop. It's then a 15-second reactivation time because the Hound II has that reduction to that. You'll see here it also gives a scan resolution adjustment of 41% down, so it almost halves your scan resolution. It takes a lot of time once you drop your thing to your cloak to actually lock onto a target. So using this, that means that when we look at our rigs, one of the first rigs we're going to consider is a targeting system subcontroller. We need to get our lock-on speed back up thanks to that cloaking device dropping it. Obviously we do have a fairly good speed here anyway. 634mm isn't bad at all. It means against the larger targets like a battleship, battlecruiser, or retrievers, I know I keep hammering that one, those bigger ships you'll still lock onto fairly quickly. So you can lock onto those, open fire, apply your scram and stop them running away, and hopefully with the absolutely monstrous damage that those large torpedoes do, you should be able to lock on fairly quickly. Like here though, I've gone for the PvE build, which means I'm using that medium shield booster instead. I still leave that rig on though for when I want to PvP. I then have polycarbon engine housing and auxiliary thrusters. This increases the flight velocity and the reduces the inertia modifier, so I can maintain a tighter orbit at higher speeds. All about helping me with the speed tank. Now on the other side of things, in the combat rigs, I've gone for a couple of warhead rigger catalysts, which again are fairly cheap on the market, drops that explosion radius, and we've got a warhead flare catalyst, which increases the explosion velocity. Again, this is all about making sure that we can hit those smaller ships. If we've got we're going to struggle to hit anything that's small and fast, so I want to try and, bring my missiles down to be able to hit those better. Yeah, of course, you could go for things like the bay loading accelerators and califaction catalysts and massively increase that DPS. That's going to be awesome. You can get some truly terrifying DPS out of this. Like, I think I've seen it go up to like 600 cold DPS on a frigate, but then you're only going to be able to apply that against the biggest of battle cruisers and battleships. Anything smaller than that, you're really going to struggle. I go for having less DPS overall, but more ability to actually apply that damage to a target. That is going to work out a lot better, especially for PvE or against those cruisers and smaller targets in PvP as well. Anyway, what I'm going to do now is jump into some footage I took of a combat anomaly and showcase how the large torpedoes actually work against different targets. This is one of the Minmatar Tech 8 news encounters. Yes, this can do Tech 9 encounters, but I just wanted to showcase this with a Tech 8 because it has a nice little mix of some of the smaller and large targets in order to showcase what I want to regarding the torpedoes. So I'm about to go up against a Gistum Tornado. Of course, the Tornado is it's a battle cruiser. I've got a target painter here on it, making it have a larger signature radius. Here comes that first volley here of those large torpedoes. 4,497 damage for that first hit. That's cold. That's not with me having the weapon upgrade module active. We're just doing cold damage here against that tornado. And you'll see that being a large battle cruiser, we're hitting for 4,500 damage almost in each strike. And that's against shield. Remember, we've got a small bonus to the electromagnetic damage that these torpedoes do. Plus, obviously, they do a good amount of thermal as well. Does help us cut through the shields. There we are. We're now through the shields into the armor. And watch what happens once we hit armor, and we now have that monstrous amount of explosive damage coming off these torpedoes. I'm also activating the weapon upgrade module here, just so we can see there's 5,000 damage straight away on that shot there. It's a nice solid hit here against the tornado. Next volley goes off. How much is this going to do? That's going to hit for, again, 4,600. Not bad DPS hit, not bad damage at all here against this tornado. It's surprisingly quick for a frigate to kill a battle cruiser this quickly. Well, you can see how fast that's going down, and I'm taking no damage in response, just having an afterburner running. You can see as well that my capacitor is sitting quite comfortable and stable up there. So now we're going to move on to the Stabber Sniper. Now the Stabber Sniper obviously has a much smaller signature radius. So whereas I've been doing sort of 4,500 damage per strike here against the Stabber, against the Tornado, the battle cruiser, let's see what we're actually going to do against the Stabber Sniper here. This is a fairly fast moving target. It's also fairly small. The missiles have launched. We'll see when they hit. You'll see we're only doing 2,000 damage. That's compared to doing, what, 4,500 against a battle cruiser. So yes, okay, fortunately the Stabber has less HP, so we're still going to be able to cut through this quite comfortably, but you can see the difference in the application there. Whereas, again, we're doing more damage against bigger targets, and we're struggling against the smaller and faster ones. And when the next wave spawns, there is going to be an even larger emphasis on this. This means that when you're using the Hound II, and indeed the Hound before it, you do just need to consider what you're going up against. For PvE, if you're going to be going up against an anomaly with a lot of battleships and battle cruisers, then those large torpedoes are going to be absolutely dominating. Whereas if you're going up against something that's going to have a lot of frigates and destroyers, and some of the smaller cruisers, like the Stabber for example, you are going to need to possibly consider swapping to something just like small torpedoes, or even small missiles. You're going to get a lot lower DPS on paper, but you're going to be able to apply that damage a lot better. I did do this as a test, and you'll see that when I did it with the torpedoes, I'm still doing about 2,000 per hit against these smaller targets, like the cruisers here. But again, I'm hitting faster, I'm hitting more frequently, and I'm getting it's a smaller smack, but I'm getting hit. I'm hitting more frequently, which means it actually works out better overall. Whereas here against the large targets, the large torpedoes are excellent, but they struggle against the smaller. Now, we're going to have a second wave spawn when my lag catches up with me. This is obviously on Fulmination, and Fulmination really does lag even more than live. Here we have, first of all, a Gisti Talwar C. Now, again, I need to do a video on what a Sea Destroyer is. I have got some access briefly to these on the test server. Let's put up the target painter. Once we're in range, I will activate these torpedoes. Now, this is it's a destroyer, which means it's a small ship, but it's actually a surprisingly slow ship as well, and it's, for a destroyer, actually quite large. It's only slightly smaller than the Stabber. It has considerably less HP than the Stabber, and it's also slower moving than the Stabber. So as I'm firing on it, I'm doing almost as much damage as I was to the Stabber, but obviously the same damage that I was doing to the Stabber is considerably higher percentile here, so it's going to take fewer volleys now to actually get through this. I have had to activate the shield booster there for a couple of cycles as well, just to be sure. There we go, straight through shields and armor in one hit. We're down to hull now. Hopefully this will be the next one. We can take it out in the next volley. Then I'm going to move on to that Rupture II Guardian. Now, the Rupture II Guardian, the reason that that's in my sights as my next target is because, as you can see, as I'm looking at it here in the overview, there is no flashy box around it. It means it's not locked onto me, which means it is our logistics ship. This is the ship that is going to be healing up the others. Now, when I did the first couple of waves of this encounter, let me tell you, the logistics caused problems when I was against some of those smaller ships, because I'm not able to apply my damage to those smaller ships. I was finding the logistics vessels missiles were actually out healing me until I went in and took them off the table instead. You can see that Talwar, I'm still struggling to kill this thing. It's quite a small target, which means those missiles don't do that damage very well. Yay, it's awesome having 450 plus DPS, but not if you can't actually hit the target with it. So now we're going to move on to the Rupture. Again, the Rupture is quite small as far as cruisers go, and it's fairly fast moving, but I'm still getting 2,000 damage per hit, which is a good amount of damage, and hopefully that will allow me to clear through the Rupture here nice and quickly. Once we do this, we'll move back onto the Tornado, and we'll talk about like how quickly that goes down. You'll see I am waiting, however. There is one ship in this wave that is going to cause me some major problems, as you'll see later, and it actually takes about 7 minutes to kill this one particular ship, which we'll get to in just a moment. Waiting here for the next smack on the Rupture. We're going to move on to armor next. Obviously armor and structure, the Rupture doesn't have all that much of, and with me doing extra explosive damage, I should actually cut through that nice and quickly. And I have got a target painter on me as well here from the Bellicose, but that's not really doing all that much. I've got a 22 meter signature radius. Obviously that is being increased by the Bellicose, but not to the point where anything is still hitting me. I'm still small enough, and I'm still fast enough here in the Hound II to be avoiding most of that damage. Hopefully we're about to come down to the structure, the hull here of the Rupture. Next shot should take that down, and I've got the weapon upgrade module. Should I use it? I'm not going to use it this cycle. We'll use that probably on the next one if needs be. There we are, we're well into structure now. Got a little bit of a glitch there where it's still showing some of the armor, unless this is equipped with an armor repairer and it's just cycled for that massive boost in armor. Doesn't seem right, but there we go. Yeah, apparently there was additional armor there. Somehow I hit the hull without hitting the armor, but okay, cool. And hopefully this next strike might be the one with the weapon upgrade module as well. Can I take the Rupture out in this one hit? Not quite. Not quite. Next hit will do it, though, I'm absolutely certain. There we go. And we're going to move on to the Bellicose Covert Ops next, because this is the ship that causes problems. As you'll see, I'm already in the orbit range here, 12 kilometers, orbiting that now well within range of my torpedoes. First volley has gone out, and it did 241 damage. That's a far cry from the 4,500 that I was doing against the Tornado earlier on. 235. It's pitiful, because the Bellicose E-War here is such a small ship. It is a tiny signature radius and a high flight velocity, which means my missiles are really struggling to apply that damage. Even though I have the target painter on there, it's just not doing much at all. And this ship, as you can see, is going to take some time to get through. Let's watch what the next smack is. 223. We're barely moving here. That's horrifically slow, and it's going to take a long time to cut through that. Longer, in fact, than it took to cut through the Talwars. That's a problem. And that's the problem here that I want to highlight when using these large torpedo launches. Against slow and large ships, big slow targets, then those large torpedoes do absolutely monstrous damage. But against something that is small and fast, like the Bellicose E-War here, you really struggle to apply that damage, and that's when you would start to look at swapping to small missiles and torpedoes instead. Now that means, if you want to, you can actually carry the small small torpedo or small missile launchers in your cargo hold. When you do a encounter like this, you go in with those equipped. When those are done, you then fly to a station, dock up, quickly swap modules, come back out and take out the big ships. Now, yes, okay, you might think that sounds like an awful lot of busy work. Surely it can't be faster jumping in and out of stations like that. It actually is. It means in an encounter like this, I use the small modules against things like the Bellicose and the Talwar. Once those are cleared out, I then jump back, I grab the big missiles, and I kill the other ships in literally, as you saw, 6 or 7 hits. It's a much faster way of doing things. Anyway, before we finish this video then, I am going to dock up because we've got some giveaway winners to announce. Congratulations to those. Let's jump and dock now. And there we go, that's the Hound II in a nutshell. Ultimately, we've discussed now about why you would use the large torpedo launchers or when you would stick with small missiles. We've talked briefly about how to use this in PvE and PvP, and it is worth mentioning that most of what we've discussed today does also apply if you're looking to fly the Manticore II, the Purifier II, or the Nemesis II. Those do actually, as far as PvE is concerned, if you're going for the small weapon fits, they are actually, viable options, whereas the tier 6 versions really weren't. The trouble is, when it comes to the stealth bombers, I do honestly find that the Hound II is just better than the others. There are very specific circumstances when a Purifier II, Nemesis II, or Manticore II may be a slightly better option than the Hound, but considering how rare those specific circumstances are, and how little an advantage those stealth bombers actually get, it makes sense to me just to stick with the Hound and make that your stealth bomber of choice. The only reason to go for any of the others is either for looks, for thematics, or because the Hound II has shot up in price due to the so-called Benzie effect, and the others are just considerably cheaper. I don't know. But anyway, before we wrap things up here, I do have 2 months of Combo Omega to give away to 2 lucky winners, so I want to congratulate Mark Hafner and Gary Cottam. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing those names correctly. But you two are the lucky winners. You each win a month of Combo Omega. Please contact me either in the comment section down below or by coming and finding me on Discord. I will get that added to you as soon as possible. Do be aware it can take a week or 2 after I've announced the winners to actually get that applied to the winners. It does take a bit of time sometimes, netties. I suppose they've got a lot of stuff they need to do. Giving a prize out to a giveaway from a YouTuber isn't top of their list, but they will get it to you ASAP. Anyway folks, thank you for watching this one right the way to the end. Do let me know which stealth bomber you're looking forward to most. If you think my fit is utter trash, do let me know in the comment section down below, but at least have the courtesy of explaining why you think it's trash and how you think you could do it better. Otherwise folks, thanks for watching, happy sailing, and see you in New Eden.